So this is Alice from AbilityNet. She's moderating. Jane from Crawford Technologies. Amy from the BBC. And Jack from Jadu. So they are your experts today. I think we're going to go in the order of Jack first. And I'll leave you to, you're going to see what happens.
Okay, thanks a lot. So my name's Jack Niland. I'm a UX designer at a company called Jadu. So we primarily make products for, in the UK, local authorities. Is it? Can't hear me?
We've got a mic.
This one, you can use this one.
Can see it.
Okay, sorry about that. Good start. So yeah, I work for a company called Jadu, and we make a suite of products, a CMS, a CRM, and a forms product for, in the UK, local government. In Australia, our main clients are higher education. So all customers that are really accessibility focused. Me personally, accessibility has always been a passion of mine. My grandmother was blind, my son is profoundly deaf. He uses Bsl as his first language, so me and my family have all learned Bsl. So over the last couple of years at Spacecraft, although I'm a UX designer, I've come into more of a role of accessibility training with our clients. So I go out to our clients and teach them about how to implement our products accessibly. Because a big problem in the past, I think, was sometimes a client would get our product and it would all be built to 2.1 standards, and they think, right, job done, that's accessible. But obviously, it all depends on what content they upload to their websites. And I find that something people always engage with is social media when I'm doing this training, because obviously it relates to their personal life as well. So just going to talk about 5 tips for social media today. The first of which is alt text and how to do alt text on your different social medias. So they have all various different levels of difficulty for how to import alt text into your social media. Twitter is probably the most awkward. You first of all have to go into your settings and enable alt text before it will allow you to import alt text onto any of your images. Instagram and Facebook are a little bit easier, so when you've uploaded your photo, you can go into advanced settings and that will allow you to import alt text. And LinkedIn is probably the best of the sort of 4 social media options. With those, as soon as you upload your image, there's quite a key call to action to change the alt text. So that's alt text. The second thing is accessible hashtags. So this one's really simple. All you need to do to make your hashtags accessible is use camel case. So what that means is the first letter of each new word, you want to capitalize that. If you don't do that, then it will just be read out as one long blurb that doesn't really make sense to a screen reader. But if you use camel case, then the hashtag will be read out properly. So the next thing I want to talk about is emojis, emoji etiquette for your social media. So sometimes on social media, some companies use them in funny ways, like maybe you use a long list of emojis all in one post. I've also seen some companies using where you have a word and then an emoji and then a word and then an emoji. I'm not sure why people do this, but yeah, if you imagine how a screen reader interprets that, they're going to be reading out all of those emojis individually, and it can be quite tiresome to have to listen to that, especially if someone's got a smiling pile of poo 20 times in their tweet. But yeah, I would encourage you to sort of listen to your tweets using a screen reader if possible. The next thing I'm going to talk about is mentions, so mention etiquette. Sometimes if you are composing a tweet with lots of different people, maybe you're going to tweet about the whole panel today and talk about how this is the best session you've seen. No? Okay. Maybe. We've not got to the end yet. Okay. A good way to do that is rather than at the start of the message, you put it at the end. So the core content of your message is presented first. And that's advice for generally any sort of accessible content, but you really should be thinking about that with your social media posts as well. And finally, I'll just talk briefly about captions, because I know Amy's going to talk about accessible videos as well. But just to drive home the point, to use captions on all of your accessible, all of your social media content. So everything from videos, Instagram stories. There's loads of great apps you can use, AutoCap, Clipomatic, stuff like that, which will interpret all of your content for you. I do a lot of my social media on Instagram in BSL, and I've used AutoCap before. And it's quite funny, my sister said to me, because it's got the watermark AutoCap, unless you want to pay for it. I didn't. So it had the watermark at the bottom saying AutoCap, and she's like, that's amazing. How did it interpret your BSL and read it out? Well, it's not quite that advanced yet, but it will interpret any spoken language. Just before I finish, not specifically on social media, but I just wanted to mention as well about Bsl interpretation. That's something I always recommend to our local authority councils. Obviously, they've got a responsibility to include that level of accessibility on their sites. It can be a bit of a harder sell for private companies, but if you do want to have access to the 90-odd thousand members of the deaf community for whose first language is BSL, then I would recommend all of your content, not just social media, other things on your site as well, to have BSL interpretation for that. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Jack. Amy, would you like to?
Yeah. Oh, mic's working, that's great. Hi, my name's Amy, and I'm part of the internal communications and engagement team at the BBC. And I'm also a BBC accessibility champion. And as such, it's a big part of my job to make sure that all our internal content at the BBC is of a good quality and is very accessible. And I'm going to talk specifically about video today because we're using it more and more to convey messages internally at the BBC. You know, we're a media corporation. And because we're such a big organisation, that means that we're delivering messages in video to colleagues, a very diverse workforce in a lot of different situations and environments. And it's our job as a team to make sure that our content doesn't limit anyone anyway, and no matter where they are, that they're able to access the messages that we're delivering. So about 6 months ago, we made an internal accessibility content policy, which just provides some quick and easy guidelines for everyone on what we expect on our content, on our internal channels. And this has just kind of helped raise a consistent bar for what we want for our content when it's to make it accessible. And we launched that in tie-in with Global Accessibility Awareness Day this year. And not only does it show colleagues and content contributors what we expect from their content, but it also sends a broader message to our colleagues that we've made an important commitment to making sure that our content is accessible to everyone. And to keep video accessible, so there's a couple of things that we do. The main one, the obvious one, is making sure that our videos have subtitles and captions on them, always. So on our intranet, we use closed captions. So that just means that they need to be toggled on or off. And so for all our internal channels, for example, our digital screens or our social media, our professional social media internally, we use open captions just to make sure that everyone can see it and everyone can understand the message, because our digital screens have no sound, so obviously they do need to have the subtitles on them. And then another important thing is transcripts. And these are quite popular at the BBC for non-disabled and disabled colleagues alike, because we get the feedback that people find it quicker and easier to read the dialogue or the transcript rather than watch the video, because they can get the message and find out what the gist of the comms is a lot quicker. And it also means that it's quite useful for people who are on the go, who are accessing our comms from smartphones or are on a train and perhaps don't have, the internet connection to watch a video. that they can easily just get a downloadable Word document, have it open, and are able to read what the message is, what the interview is with high-profile senior leaders, and they're able to get that in message. Another one, which is signposting. So we always make sure that we know that our videos always will have subtitles on, but it's just to let people know that subtitles are available, because on our intranet they're closed captions. So it's just to let people know that they are there, whether or not they're familiar with how we present that video. So we use iPlayer as a web app on our intranet. To know that it can be toggled on or off, and it can also be adjusted. It can be moved on the screen, and you can have it as a large text or smaller text, depending on what's best for the person. And again, with transcripts, so sometimes when we have an internal broadcast for senior leaders, or Tony Hall has a message, normally they would come with live subtitles, but we'd always make sure that there's a transcript available as well. And if we're still trying to get that, but the video itself has to be broadcast quite urgently, we let colleagues know that a transcript is soon to follow. And another one, to tie in with our accessible content policy, it's just providing simple guidelines, because we are quite a small team, the corporate comms team, and we get a lot of content coming in from lots of different departments, lots of different regions. We've got an aerial network of people that cover lots of different things going on in the BBC. They like to use video, so we like to enable people to give us this content, and we just want to provide simple guidance as well, how to make their content accessible. So what we find a lot with colleagues, when we say to people that, we need to raise the level of accessibility on the content, a lot of people will say that they don't make content accessible because for the fear of doing it wrong, or that they're doing something wrong, or they're going to make a mistake. And it's just having that reassurance for people that it is easy, and there are resources available, and there's training available. And because we've got our Accessibility Champions network at the BBC, that, if they can ask me, and if I don't know, then I've got this whole network of people, and one of them is bound to know the answer to that. So it's just knowledge sharing and providing a more positive community around accessibility, which leads me into my fifth and final point, and one of the biggest points, I think, which is educating people. So it's sharing knowledge, it's sharing the skills, raising awareness of all these kind of things, because accessibility, it's a win-win situation, and it should be, everyone should play a part in making our content accessible internally. And so it's about getting more colleagues on board. I know this has been spoken about earlier today, and it's a big thing yesterday, but to get them sharing their own stories as well, and creating a culture where accessibility is thought of much quicker, at a much earlier point in the workflows that we have to make content. So our Director General, Tony Hall, he's a big fan of saying that the BBC is for everyone. And it definitely should be. And this is part of what I like to do as an accessibility champion. It's just kind of living by that and knowing that the content we do is accessible. And if there's anyone has got, because I'm still quite new to this, so we make our channels open. If there's any feedback for anything, that we see if we can act on that and develop a more open culture around accessibility on our internal content.
Great, thank you very much, Amy. Jane. Yeah.
Hi folks, my name is Jane Black and I work for Crawford Technologies. And for those of you that don't know us, we're actually a software and services company, and we've been developing enterprise software solutions for about 25 years. And one of our areas of specialism is in providing solutions to businesses and organizations to help them make their documents accessible. And we like to help them make that process as easy as possible and as simple as possible. So for the purposes of this session, which is about accessible content, I wanted to share some thoughts on what content is, what purpose it serves, and what format it can be delivered in, or what form it can be delivered in. So I was looking around for a definition of content, And my favourite that I discovered was that content is both information and communication. And I think that that's whatever type of content you're talking about, that's true. You know, you're communicating with your customers or users, and you are providing information to them that's useful for them. And so I guess the question is, how does that tie into what we do at Crawford Technologies and what we do particularly with accessible documents? Interestingly, for many businesses, documents are actually the most common form of content that they create. So it's the primary way that they communicate with their customers and users, and it's the primary delivery method for information. Historically, those documents would have been delivered by mail in paper format, but now with businesses moving to digital channels, most of those will be delivered in a digital format via PDF or HTML. So whether we're talking about personal documents that are communicated from a company to their customers, like a transactional document such as a bill or a statement or an invoice or something like that, or whether we're talking about more generic published documents that companies might want to share with interested parties, like annual reports or product guides or user manuals, it's really important that that content is not forgotten when it comes to accessibility. And I was asked as part of this conversation to share sort of 5 tips. And they're relatively high level, but I think they're important. And I would say that first and foremost is to understand what an accessible document really is and how it works with assistive technology and how the extra layers of metadata within that document allow an assistive technology device to read it. And I guess that leads into my second tip, which is think about the digital experience of the people that are coming to your website or using web portals or web apps, and think about whether they really have as equal access to the information that you're providing as their cited counterparts do. And then I guess the third would really be about, inclusive design is important. It is important to think when you're designing documents to build accessibility in from the beginning. But the reality for companies is that they often have lots of legacy documents or historic communications that have been created many, many years ago. So we would also say that there are solutions out there for people that need to deal with those documents. And obviously, going forward, make your documents accessible at composition going forward. But for those of you that have documents that are still an important part of your business, look at remediating those and making them accessible as well. And then I think my fourth point would really be about collaboration. So documents can be produced by lots of different parts of an organisation. And lots of different teams can manage the content within them. And I think it's important to get all of those people, not just an accessibility team, but all of those people on board. So people that manage the content, people that deliver the content, people that create the content. And then I guess my final point would be really just to act. People within organisations are obviously very scared by the size of their accessible document problem. And often do nothing for fear of, like Amy was saying, getting it wrong or of just having too much to do. I think the important thing is to start to collaborate with other people, to bring on board partners, and to make sure you start to make those documents accessible to all of your customers.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think you made a really good point about kind of existing documents that are already out there. That can be very sort of daunting for a company to have them and wonder what to do with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
While you were talking, we've had a lot of questions come through. The one that's currently at the top, it talks about the automated creation of things like closed captions and subtitling. And I think this flows through to social media as well with images. Do either of you have any comments on?
Yeah, I think both automatic subtitles and the automated sort of alt text that you get through AI these days, both of those 100% need to be checked because I've seen loads of examples of them being really dodgy. So they definitely need some manual testing. You can't just rely on those at all.
Have you seen any good examples of them?
Good examples would just be somebody that has taken the time to make sure that the subtitles accurately reflect the content. Yeah.
Great. There's also one about talking about open captions versus closed captions. Amy, do you have any comments on either of those?
Yeah, so we use both open captions and closed captions at the BBC, and I guess it all depends on the channel and the environment that they're being used. So, for example, we'll always use open captions on our digital screens because there's no point playing a video in, where we have our digital screens, which are around lifts and receptions, and they're quite busy and they're quite loud, so they don't have any sound. So it's obviously really important to make sure that they have captions on all the time, because otherwise no one's going to understand the message. And for things like our intranet, we have closed captions because it gives people a choice. They might not need the captions or they might want them, but it's just kind of showing people where they can turn off and off depending on their preference. So where we can give people the option, we make sure that they are closed captions, but where they're required, for example, in our social media feed where it's just press play and they could not have headphones, or they could be in a quiet environment, the subtitles are there so they don't, they can get the message across. Otherwise, we like to give people the option, just let them know the subtitles are there.
Great. So there's a question that says, what about your thoughts on videos that have text but no speech, just music? So I guess maybe about the audio described use on videos. Is it always necessary to have a video audio described?
I think there's definitely is, because even though if it's just music and text, if you're deaf, for example, you can't hear the music, you can't hear if there's any sound effects, if there's energetic music and someone's running, you can hear their feet, you can hear the music, and it's just trying to describe what they could be missing from not hearing that music, from not hearing those footsteps. So absolutely, definitely needs captions just to give that whole sort of communication, to know that is there, and it's otherwise you're just watching it and you can't hear anything. And audio description is definitely something we're looking into internally. It's definitely going to be helpful, but at the moment we're still in the research kind of level where we're looking at what we can use and what's the best way and the best instances to use audio description.
I think just on Amy's point there, it's important as well that if your video doesn't have any audio, that you let the user know that as well. So on Instagram you can press a button that says no audio, and then if the user taps on it they'll have a little notification saying no audio. I don't know about anyone else in the room, but I found that really buggy. Like loads of times when I've pressed that, then the video uploads and it still has audio. It hasn't worked basically, so sometimes what I do as well within the post or within a transcript that you've got, I will indicate no audio as well so that the user is aware that they're not missing out on any part of that experience.
Yeah, I guess with social media, not from the audio side, but from the text side, there's GIFs are so popular with GIFs with text on it. Kind of, how would you go about that? How would you go about describing that on social media?
Yeah, GIFs. That's a difficult one. To my knowledge, I don't think there's any way to make them fully accessible. I don't think you can add alt text. We had one of our clients was asking if they could have a lot of animated GIFs on one of their news sites, but obviously our clients are all public sector organisations, and we sort of advised them. I don't think that's the best approach. But in terms of social media, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if anyone else in the room is aware of how. Yeah.
I think a common practice, because Twitter doesn't have built-in alt text for GIFs, what people tend to do is they put. What I've seen a lot of people do on Twitter when they want to put alt text for GIFs is, since Twitter doesn't have built-in support for that, they'll put square brackets and write alt, and then just put it in the tweet message.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. Sorry, I've lost where my question was. Mark, did you notice any?
Sorry, I'm on.
No. Oh.
I'm watching the questions in the other room, actually. There's one here about maps. Have you done the maps one? Because I wasn't in the room.
No, I have not.
Making maps accessible.
Do you have any thoughts or ideas
Anybody know how to
about
do that?
making?
Oh, this is an interesting one. It's not one that I've ever had the opportunity to have a look at how to make it accessible. So I wonder if I'd be interested to know if there's anyone out there that has had the task of making a map accessible or similar.
Or anybody who wants to fill that gap in the market. Hi.
Hi, my name's Emma. I work at Pearson Education, a publisher, and we're obviously very interested in looking at this. My colleague Katrin and I are working on it at the moment. We've done a lot of research into it ourselves and have seen varying ways of doing it with varying degrees of success. It kind of touches on the areas of obviously not relying on colour alone, using shapes, using symbols, using keys, using labels, etc. But doing that successfully on complicated things is very tricky. So anybody here with any other experience, I'd be really interested to hear about that too.
Oh, Gareth. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm from the BBC as well. Hi. Maps is a really tricky one, and you're never going to find an exact answer for the map itself. Obviously, we do a lot of maps, not necessarily in Amy's space in internal communication, but obviously on broadcast side, etc. And there's certain amounts of stuff that you can do. One of the things on the broadcast side, what they do is they have the map, but they always describe what the map is conveying in the editorial, so it's not just conveyed. And so the person that's presenting the news talks about what the map is telling you. That is then subtitled, and people can access what the map means. And sometimes it's a bit of a rabbit hole around the map itself. There's a lot you can do, but you can't do everything. But to always make sure where you use a map on a page, every single key piece of information is delivered within the text of the page as well. So there's a right to information that map is conveying. And so you can do things with, colours. You can think about colour blindness, which is always a fun one when it comes to electoral maps for us. But I always say, just have a look at Italy in the years of black and white TV. They always had 13 political parties. We can find another way of putting that information across. So there are ways of doing stuff, but always make sure that people have the right to access the information that the map is conveying, as well as trying to optimise the map itself. We've got guidelines around infographics, but it's a continuous area of improvement and discovery as we find it breaks in more and wonderful ways.
Sorry, shouldn't you want me to leave you this? That's okay.
I've been doing some research on it very recently in terms of looking at other companies and the way that they've tried to approach things as well. And I'm discovering what you're talking about in that often you seem to have to provide the context, and the alternative, it's just not possible to do everything in the map itself. Sometimes because of the kinds of maps that you might be sharing, whether they're political or whether they are specific to geography, for example, certain types of geographical maps and like choropleth maps and things like that. I've not yet found a successful way of doing that as a holistic approach. So having the alternative, it's really good to hear you say that and to think that we're not missing something so far.
Well, we don't make all our own maps as well, which is another thing. So during something like an election or an event, there's stuff that goes out and is being used by the widest media, and sometimes it turns up in maybe not a format that you would have done yourself. And that's why making sure that it's being conveyed by presenters, it's being conveyed within text, and no one is missing out on the rights to the information that map contained is the number one priority.
Yeah. I'm curious too to know, I mean, obviously that's in a presentation view where the viewer can't necessarily interact with it, but if anyone else has any experience at all of ways that people might interact with it or have to use it in a personal environment. I came across a company called High Charts, which I don't know if anyone has heard of, and they're very interesting, but I've only just come across them and looked into what they're doing. So I'm curious to know if anyone knows about that. And I'm also, I still, from looking at that, don't feel that they've entirely got it either. So, yeah, if anyone else has any experience, that would be great.
There's a hand over there.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Michael.
Hi there. Maybe a longer story, but it might give some insight on how to tackle the problem, and maybe the problem isn't the problem. So,
Sorry, Michael, can you introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Michael. I'm from Microsoft, Michael Vermeersch. I'll be speaking later on a little bit. So I have no sight loss. I do have cognitive disability, and when people present me with a map, I would say, hey, I'm not a bird. Can you present that information to me in a different way? And we get a 2D map, right? We're not birds, really. So that's not how we navigate normally. That's a problem for me, maybe not a problem for you, because maybe your brain works differently. Now, just keep that thought. So I've worked with the person who created Seeing AI. I worked with the person who created Soundscape. And I know about Be My Eyes. So those are 3 apps. Seeing AI runs on the iPhone and, again, has a number of use cases that it covers. Soundscape will help you navigate based on sound in a particular area. Be My Eyes is where you ask for help, somebody else, to do something. And that could be something mundane like making coffee, or swapping a cable, HDMI 1 to HDMI 2, or actually navigating in a city. But 3 different apps. And the key thing about this is that accessibility should be about choice and how information is provided and how information is consumed. When I talked to Signposting, who invented Seeing AI, I was lost with him in Seattle. And here I am, I'm guiding him, and I was lost, and I'm walking with somebody who's blind, and I'm the one who was lost. And I said to Signposting, I had to confess, sorry, Signposting, I really don't know where we are, and we need to go to this pub, as you said. I don't know where to go. Signposting said to me, what's on your left-hand side? I was like, okay. It's a bathroom store. And what's on your right-hand side? And I said, well, it's that. Okay, I know exactly where we are. And he guided me to the pub. He had the whole map of Seattle in his head. The only problem that he would face, the barrier that he faced, was the obstacles in the road or the sudden things that happened. When I would talk to Amos, who is the inventor of Soundscape, he had a totally different experience of navigation or blindness because he has a dog. Obstacles are no problem to him. His guide dog would help him. However, what's specific in his app is, hey, we know you want to go from A to B, but did you know that between A and B, a new coffee shop just opened? Would you like to have a visit there? And that's what the app would bring, that richness, which the dog can't help with. So I guess the key message here is maybe don't just focus on the map. Focus on the experience that you want to provide and provide choice to the person with the disability, which actually will then help everybody because we're all disabled when we go to a foreign town, etc., etc. And we don't necessarily are mathematical geniuses who can describe, oh, this is a map. And by the way, north is there. I wouldn't know where north is now for the moment. If they say there's a fire and just run to the north exit, we'll all die. Well, I'll so there you are. That's my answer to that.
Great, thank you. And there's somebody behind there. If you could introduce yourself as well, please.
Morning, everyone. John Worsfold from RNIB. A few years ago, there was a European project called, it was an FP7 project called HaptiMap, and the whole point of that was to try and create both web and client-side tools to try and enable individuals and companies to create accessible digital maps. So I suppose it depends, A, if the outputs of that project are still available, but if someone has a look on the web, they might find the HaptiMap project. And I also guess it depends on your starting point. Are you thinking about a digital map and what can you do? Or are you thinking about a map that is going to be printed out into a physical format and what can you do? So from a digital point of view, maybe try HaptiMap.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask Alexander. So just so you know, this is Alexander, who's from Be My Eyes. He's sitting next to Hector. He's sitting to Michael. Could you just tell us a little bit, how many people use Be My Eyes for these types of tasks? Because that's a really interesting way of answering some of these questions about content, is kind of third-party help in some other way. But what sort of stuff do Be My Eyes get used for?
It's getting...
Actually, can you introduce Be My Eyes? Who knows what Be My Eyes is, just to see how much we... I don't think you need to introduce it.
Oh, that makes...
They're all volunteers. They're all one of your 3 million volunteers.
So to the ones of you who don't have your hands up, so Be My Eyes is a free mobile app that connects people who are blind or low vision with either sighted volunteers or company representatives. And everything happens through a live video. So if you need anything described, help walking down the street, finding the right house number, or getting the coffee made, you'll just click a button, call a volunteer who will help you through live video. You can also call companies like Microsoft and Google and Lloyds Banking Group and Procter & Gamble through the platform. And it's being used by about 175,000 people who are blind or low vision, who are being supported by just over 3 million volunteers across basically any language. And the companies on the platform, Microsoft, Google, Procter & Gamble. So if you have issues with your Microsoft product or with your Google product, you can call their customer support centers directly.
Yeah. And from experience, how many of these questions are talking about mapping and moving around, I guess the navigation type stuff? What proportion of calls do you think are dealing with something along the lines of that?
Very, very. It's a lot of the calls that we do are like navigation on streets, finding, reading of opening hours on the side of the door, but also indoor navigation through supermarkets. So we do a ton of navigations. Navigation in a place like this, a big complex building, and all of these navigational tools that are based on GPS doesn't really work inside. So being able to connect to a sighted person who can help you navigate is a pretty big deal. So we do a lot of those, thousands a day.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I think that's a really interesting suggestion, Michael, as well, that you look at the problem from a different angle. The other one that reminded me of was slides on presentations. When we had that yesterday with Scope, they had a lot of information on the slides, and we were talking about it afterwards. And so what they did is they made sure that they explained the basic trends that they were referring to. There was a lot of data on slides, as there are with charts and maps and other things. So as long as you've got the basic message across that there was 7 or 8 different groups of information, they picked off the 2 most important ones, explained why they were the most important, put some context around it. Very much the way you said, Gareth, in terms of putting it in context. So thank you. That's great stuff.
Great. Yeah. Do we have time for one?
Yes.
Question? Yeah. So I guess this might be opening out to the room, the question, but kind of what approaches have worked and not worked when attempting to scale accessibility cross-functionality in large organisations? So if anyone has any suggestions of what has worked or hasn't worked?
If nobody else puts their hands up, I'm going to give the microphone to Gareth. That might make you put your hand up.
Yeah.
So scale, BBC.
Yeah, we're quite small. Well, actually, we're in Google, and compared to Google, we're quite small in scale. But it is it's not just organisational scale; it's complexity as well, and complexity of output. And I think we've heard a lot, actually, probably yesterday, around this from the leaders. If everyone was in the leaders' session, that kind of talked and tackled a lot about this. But it kind of gets down to that whole thing. You should move away from why we're doing this to how do we do this. I think you've realised you've tipped the balance in an organisation when no one asks why anymore, and everyone is talking about the way that you're doing stuff. And it's kind of where we are. I mean, the Champions Network's been an interesting one for us. It's kind of existed. Emma's going to do a whole thing on us in her session about this, so I'm not going to go there. But it's existed for many years, and it kind of ends up. It's not just about technical delivery. It's not just about design delivery and technical delivery. It's about everything. And having a champion in internal comms with Amy suddenly means that we can now deal with information to staff. It's not just about access to the desktop. It's a right to information. And that's kind of where you've got to go. If people cannot access the things that they need to know to be able to function and progress within an organisation, then something is wrong with the way that the organisation is dealing with its communication. And so the first step was the policy. You know, sitting in what the pair of us have seen events, and you sat there making a list, just going, right, okay, we need to train the people who sit on the panel to say who they are, because you end up with a bunch of people who don't say they are, and if no one in the audience recognises them or can see them or whatever, we don't know who's speaking. So there's forms around that. There's forms around, yeah. There was a wonderful one where we did an in-staff thing. It was a while back, no captions on the video, and we lost the sound. And so only the lip readers in the audience had any access to what was going on. And so, you know, you kind of learn through these mistakes. And I think it's okay to make the mistakes. They're the best thing. Failing is a really good way of learning, as long as you learn from the failures. But I think that's the whole thing with any organisation at scale. It has to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
Tools. Nigel has something to say about tools.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to make a point as well, just in addition to all that stuff. Hello, Nigel Meggitt, also from BBC. One of the things that can be a barrier to helping people do stuff is if they don't have the tools to do it. They might think, oh, it'd be really good if I could subtitle that, but how? I just don't know how to do it. So one of the initiatives that I've led is just creating a tool for staff to be able to, without having to pay any money or like download special software, be able to create subtitles that are going to work with our player for the closed caption side of thing. So now people can do that. They've made their video, they upload it, it does some help. It takes ages making subtitles. It's just a fact. It's hard, right? We've never seen a way to make it really be super efficient. But at least they have the ability to do it. And if they don't have that, then it's never going to happen.
Cool, thank you.
It's like a minimal requirement.
Thanks, Nigel. Hi there. If you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Steve from Guide Dogs. Just to say, we have a lot of people that create internal and external facing content. So we created a Creating Accessible Documents course, and people were mandated to go on it. So every person in the organisation is supposed to attend this course. It was a face-to-face course, which was quite difficult to maintain and do. We've turned it into an e-learning course, and that's had a really good take-up. So that's one thing that you could try doing. And although it concentrates on things like Word documents and PowerPoint documents, when you talk about things like creating alt text for those bits of content, it doesn't take long for people to think, well, and how does that work on a tweet? So it starts a conversation, and that's a really good way of getting the point across.
Great, thank you. I will just mention, I think the questions of scale are really about the Champions Network discussion this afternoon. I mean, I think that's where people really bump into this question. I haven't heard, sorry, I was popped out, but in case this is relevant, we subtitle our videos, short form videos, with Subtitle. You upload it, it transcribes it, you can correct the transcription, you can put it on in an accessible format as captions, and you can download it, and it's 50 cents a minute. And it won't do longer than 30 minutes. So that's the only constraint we have. We can't do our webinars with it, for example, but we do all of our short form content with that, and it's subtitled with a Z, I think, .com. You'll find it. But anybody else got a tool they use that they do quick captions? Because I know that's one that we really struggle with, because once you get people doing it, then they don't stop. But getting them to do it's the hard bit.
Ros Walker, University of Stirling. We use lecture capture now, so all our lectures are recorded, and we're using Panopto. And it was very interesting. We actually had an accessibility forum at the Panopto conference last week. There's a lot of questions being asked in higher education. Panopto does have auto-captioning, but it's not human compliant levels.
I don't know what Panopto is, sorry. So.
Panopto is the software that we use to run lecture capture. So in every lecture theatre, the lecturer's lecture is recorded so that students can watch it back afterwards, and that's available to all students. But obviously without the captions, many students are missing out, and actually we've found huge benefits of captions for many students beyond the deaf community as well. So
cool, thank you. Another tip that we've had is we always actually, Gareth, this is a bit like the one you said. We always do it as if we're speaking and there's no pictures. So when you're doing presentations or when you're doing webinars in particular, you do it as if there's only audio. So you describe everything that's on the screen, and that means that often the captions are not quite so important as in a long session. It's quite possible you can just let the auto captions do their job, because the only thing that takes us time when we run it through the auto thing is correcting it. But if we've laboured over explaining what's on the screen, then you're bound to get the idea sooner or later. So for us, the cost of doing an hour's captioning on a webinar is the time we spend actually correcting the auto captions. And that's the bit that's the hardest bit for us to afford in AbilityNet. So we have to then be pragmatic about how much of that we're actually going to do. And obviously, the other thing is, a bit like Michael said, we tell people if they haven't understood anything to tell us and speak to us, because that's what we're doing anyway. We're explaining what we know, or we're communicating with people, and we're on the other end of the phone or an email or a tweet if they've lost track of something in there because we haven't done it properly. Sorry,
something that we started doing in the 1990s on broadcast in journalism is to do a thing called bi-media production. So TV news is scripted as if it has no pictures. And it was originally an efficiency saving, which meant we could actually clip up the audio from news broadcasts and use it on one of our 60 radio stations. And it suddenly becomes really, really efficient organisationally, but then suddenly realise you don't need to audio describe everything. It's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy thing. It's a radio script that they filmed. And so, you know, it's all in the dialogue. Everyone gets everything in the dialogue. There are no visual jokes that aren't described by one of the cast. They say the joke because it's a radio script. And so script your stuff as if you're not going to have any pictures and then film it.
Cool.
It makes it a lot more accessible.